Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Ushanka Show. Stories about life in the Soviet Union. Жизнь в Советском Союзе. So recently I got this question, were Soviet rock bands on the Communist Party payroll and did you have to pay to see their concerts? What their songs about? So today we're going to talk about Soviet music bands, and by the way, I already have a playlist called Soviet Music, and if you're interested in that topic, I will post the link below in the comment section. And before we begin, I would like to remind you, please don't forget to support my work with your likes, with your comments. Super thanks will be great as well, and you also can support my work on patreon.com. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's read the comment again. Were Soviet rock bands on the Communist Party payroll and did you have to pay to see their concerts? What were their songs about? Dear comrade Phil Jameson 292, I detect some sarcasm in your question, but you know what's really sad? You were pretty much on the money when it came to the question about Soviet rock bands and their relations with Communist Party. But let's go through your question one step at a time because we have a lot of things to talk about it. Well, first of all, there was no such a thing as a rock band in the Soviet Union. Only after 1987 we started getting rock bands, and that's why I keep on saying that Perestroika was the most amazing, most fun time in my life and life of many other young people in the Soviet Union. The official name of music groups in the Soviet Union, and we weren't allowed to use the word the group either, was Вокально-инструментальный ансамбль. The vocal and instrumental assembly. Really bizarre name, but everyone used abbreviation VIA. VIA, Вокально-инструментальный ансамбль. Any Soviet VIA consisted of a couple of guys playing electric guitars. They could be a singer or people who played electric guitars also do the vocal. And of course you have a drummer. Then you have a person playing electronic piano and then maybe saxophone or something like that. So really basic setup for any vocal instrumental assembly. So they almost sounded the same, except of course they had different voices, but like music style was really similar. These VR music groups began to appear in 1960s, so I assume they were allowed under Nikita Khrushchev rule, and they were extremely popular all the way into the 1980s. And the peak of their popularity fell in 1970s, so that's Leonid Brezhnev rule, and that's when my parents were a young couple, and they had a small cassette player called Vesna 306. It was a mono player, just a single speaker. Pretty poor quality, but they play those tapes over and over again. And what's kind of funny that back then I didn't know the name of the bands. I was just a little kid, but because my parents played those tapes so much, I still remember the lyrics of quite a few songs. So when I was preparing for this video, I just started Googling, entering the words that I still remember. Опозданием мы наказаны, что слова любви прежде сказаны, что совсем другим занимались мы за полчаса для весны. Like, I still remember those words, I just never knew the band, so I googled the words, like, oh my goodness, that's Верасы. Or I entered another one, oh my goodness, that's Самоцветы. So I know from the top of my head maybe 5-6 songs that my parents loved so much and played so much, and now I could put faces on those lyrics. Okay, so now let's take a look at that comment again. With the Soviet rock bands, so once again, we had no rock bands, were on a Communist Party payroll. Well, not really, but there were a lot of limitations how the VIA music groups could perform, how can they create songs, and we'll talk about it right now. The most bizarre limitation was that you couldn't perform your own songs. So for example, you found a bunch of guys who are good with instruments, found someone with a good voice, but you couldn't write your own songs. You had to use songs written by the professional composers who were members of the Союз композиторов, so it's a union of the composers of the USSR. And those composers could use only lyrics that were written by professional poets who were members of the, once again, Union of the Soviet Writers. So you could use those guys' songs, but you couldn't write your own songs. And I have no doubt that rule could be stretched. So for example, people will take the lyrics and then they try to write their own music to it. But the general rule was you have to have a professional composer and professional poet together creating a song, and then you can perform it. And I have no doubt that this rule was put in place not because the Soviet government wanted every song to be perfect and beautiful, but because they wanted to have a control over the lyrics. They wanted people who are member of the writers union write those things and those guys on the payroll and they know the rules. So you won't have some random song popping out, which will be like maybe something against Communist Party or socialism or whatever. So we had this bizarre situation when different bands will be performing different songs written by the same people. So they will announce before performance, okay, we have a Via Samotsveti performing this song, and the lyrics written by Dabram Nravov, I still remember the last name, and music written by Pakhmutova. And then another band was singing different song, but it's once again same poet, same composer. So those guys some of them were so productive that they supplied a bunch of songs to a bunch of different bands. And if you think it's bad enough that you couldn't write and perform your own songs, it's almost like your creativity was severely castrated, okay? It was castrated, not limited. Every song had to be approved by so-called Hud Soviet, Художественный Soviet. So what was the Hud Soviet? I made a quick Google Translate. Artistic Council in the Soviet Union, a group of specially appointed persons consisting of cultural figures as well as representatives of party, of course, and government bodies, whose task is to review a work of an art of any genre in order to establish its artistic value and compliance with ideological norms, which made a decision on admission of a work to a mass viewer, reader, or listener. According to some authors, it was the type of censorship in the Soviet Union. Appointed by the central local party leadership, the Union or Republican Ministry of Culture, and the administrative leadership of cultural institution. The artistic councils included both professionals, members of the unions of composers, writers, cinematographers, as well as the party and Komsomol functionaries, as well as public figures. The artistic councils did not have a permanent composition. For each individual work or event, the composition of the council was formed separately. Any program of a music group, via theater group, new film, or other works of mass art had to be approved by the Artistic Council. Council members could express complaints and suggestions to the artists about the material which should have been heard. Without approval from the Artistic Council, performances or screenings were not permitted. So here you go. What I find extremely surprising that despite such a situation where everything was under government control, you had a government controlled composers, government controlled poets, there was still plenty of plagiarism going on, but usually that's when the music was borrowed from the Western bands or Western performance and then used in Soviet songs. And here's a classic example of such a Soviet plagiarism. And I apologize, I cannot play any music on my videos due to YouTube copyrights. But there was a 1979 One-Way Ticket song by a band called Eruption. And it was copied one for one, except lyrics was in Russian. So instead of one-way ticket, it went sini ini, sini. Otherwise, it's exactly the same tune. Okay, let's take a look again at the question. Were the Soviet VIA bands on the Communist Party payroll? And did you have to pay to see their concerts? And the short answer, no. Soviet bands were not on a Communist Party payroll. In fact, they were milked so hard by the Soviet government. Okay, so let's talk about how the Soviet music bands were paid. Well, first of all the artists that created the band, VIA, had to be professional artists. What I mean, you have to finish some kind of music school or college and have a diploma. Then you need to go through so-called tarifikatsiya. So that's the pay grade qualifications. And then you receive your stavka. This is how much you're going to get paid per concert. So that was all official deal. And then your band should get a so-called gastrolное удостоверение. So that's an ID for the concert. So you're allowed to travel and have a concert. And it's called gastroli in Russian language. So that's when you go from city to city and you do concerts. Once your band gets this concert tour certification, and every performer will have their own tariff ID, which means tariff is not like tax, but it's your pay rate. Then you start traveling from city to city. And of course, we talk about socialism. You're not getting paid for how many tickets you sold. You're getting paid per concert. And the flat fee was 11 rubles per concert. Or if you perform solo like just one singer, then you get double. You get 22 rubles per concert. Then apparently you pay taxes, 13% income tax, 6% if you're a single guy, has no kids, and then you got, of course, Komsomol dues, you got your labor union dues. So if you, out of 22 rubles, you will get 15 with some change after one concert. So the Soviet music band was expected to perform 20 concerts per month when they go on a music tour, but of course, since they were making money per concert and they were young and restless, they made 50, 60 concerts a month, so almost like 2 concerts per day in order to make more money. And, you're 25, you're playing with guitar, you're singing, and you're making 15 rubles per each concert times 60 concerts, 900 rubles, you make double than any minister of the Soviet Union, and you're only 25. But of course, those 900 rubles a month were breadcrumbs compared to what government was making off these concerts. It took me some digging to find out the prices for the concert tickets. So premium ones were like this ticket is 5 rubles, which is a lot of money if you make 150 rubles a month. This is for the concert of Elton John in Moscow on May 28, 1979. And here's the back of that ticket. As you see, it says in Russian, Elton John, Великобритания, Great Britain. And number 3 is interesting. It says, вход в зрительный зал с портфелями, фотоаппаратами и магнитофонами запрещен. So you cannot enter the hall carrying a case, so like a luggage, photo cameras or recorders, tape recorders. So that's, of course, before the era of cell phones. But this is limitations, and kids before 16-year-old not allowed to any concert that start after 7:30 in the evening. So once again, thanks to Ushanka Show, I learned something new myself. I never knew that Elton John visited Soviet Union back in 1979. Well, I was only 8 years old. But once again, he was, we'll call it premium performer, premium goods. So his tickets were 5 rubles. Average Soviet music band, vocal instrumental assembly, the ticket price was 3 rubles. A little bit cheaper, but still pretty pricey. And I got curious, did Elton John also get paid 15 rubles a concert? But no, apparently Soviet organization Goskoncert, so that's a state concert, paid John $1,000 per show, which was the lowest he received since his times in Los Angeles when he played at the club in early 1970s. But he probably did pretty well because he also came up with the album and also with the documentary. So he probably made his money in the West. Also, the Wikipedia claims that the concert ticket prices were 8 rubles, which maybe explains why the ticket I showed you for 5 rubles has ink overprint that says Invalid Отечественной войны, Civil War Invalid. And so he got a discount of 3 rubles and paid 5 instead of 8. Which brings us to the question of scalping, or as we used to say in the Soviet Union, спекуляция или перепродажа, speculation or reselling. Yes, such things of course happened, as anything will be in a high demand, there'll be people trying to make some money of it. So Elton John tickets were resold for 20 times more the price of 8 rubles, which is astronomical. It's like pushing 200 rubles per ticket, when average salary was about 150. And the most interesting case was with Vladimir Mulyavin, who was the leader of the popular Belarusian band Pisnyary. One time, he was totally wasted and reselling tickets to his own concert for 25 rubles a pop, while a ticket was 3 rubles. Another interesting detail I need to mention about Soviet music bands, Soviet vocal instrumental ensembles, is that they were required to wear proper clothing during the concerts, that they usually be like 2 or 3 piece suit, perform modestly, so not doing any wild body movements and no wild performances like screaming, just do your normal singing, nothing crazy. And of course, when you talked about Melodia, всесоюзная фирма грампластинок. So the Melody All Union Company manufacturing long plays, and it belonged to the Ministry of Culture of the Soviet Union. The Melodia company was organized in 1964 by basically combining under one roof all the factories that manufactured long plays in the Soviet Union, mostly Moscow and Leningrad. And so there was a monopoly. It was one company under Ministry of Culture manufacturing all the LPs, and they became the sixth largest LP manufacturer in the world, which is of course no surprise. A single company in the largest country in the world with population around 250 million. Unfortunately, I couldn't find information about how the bands were paid for publishing their albums and LPs through Melodia, but they definitely weren't paid based on how many albums were sold, how many LPs were sold, because I found an interview from the guy who created a band called Zodiac from Latvia, and he was surprised to find out that his album was sold about 20 million copies in the Soviet Union in the 80s. So if he didn't know how many albums were sold, that means that he was never paid, commission for each album sold. They were just paid flat fee to publish an album, and you done, son. Similarly, the Moscow band called Veselые Ребята, Jolly Dudes, their very first album was sold 16 million copies in 4 years between 1970 and 1974. But they never became a millionaires. They just were continuing doing concert for 15 rubles a pop. But to be fair, you couldn't do much with millions of rubles in the Soviet Union. So if you were a Soviet, even legal millionaire, there was no luxury market to soak up your cash. You couldn't buy a luxury boat. We had no luxury cars, no luxury watches, all that fancy crap that exists in the West for the people who rich or who want to look rich. Nothing like that existed in the Soviet Union, so you're just going to keep your money sitting in the bank because really nothing you could do with them. Some of you may remember my video about corruption in the Soviet Union and so-called Хлопковое дело, the cotton case, when people were stealing millions of rubles through the cotton scheme, and they couldn't do anything with those money except buy golden coins from like Tsar era and silver coins, and they bury them for the better times when capitalism would return to the Soviet Union. As I mentioned earlier, unfortunately I cannot play any music on my channel due to copyrights, so I'm just gonna run through the list of most popular bands in the Soviet Union that time, and then I'll try to provide all the links below in the comment section. Okay, so out of Belarus and Soviet Republic, there were three extremely popular bands: Verasy, Syabry, and Pesnyary. They performed songs in Russian as well as in Belarusian language, and they were kind of like a little bit of a folk music, so they still sounded pretty much the same as the other Soviet vocal instrumental ensembles. You got electric guitar, got a synthesizer, drums, and a singer, but it was a slight folk flavor of Belarusian kind, and it was extremely popular. One of the most popular bands was the band from Moscow that I mentioned earlier, Veselые Ребята, the Jolly Dudes. From Ukraine, we had Via Smerichka, Arnika, and Vodograi, the Waterfall. One of the most popular bands in the Soviet Union was Via Samotsveti, the Gems. It was formed in Moscow in 1971. Another extremely popular band was from Leningrad. It was called Поющие гитары, the Singing Guitars. They were extremely popular in the early 70s, and their top song was the blues song, Синяя птица, the complete rip-off I mentioned earlier, Синий синий иней, Синий синий иней. And of course I need to mention Via Yalla from Tashkent, Uzbekistan. They made a super hit, Три колодца Uchkuduk, Three Wells Uchkuduk. That was a mega hit in 1981, although some people mention that it really sounds similar to Country Roads Take Me Home tune. Anyway, that band was super popular in the early 80s all over Soviet Union. Everyone was singing that song. Fun fact, Uchkuduk was so-called closed city, and KGB was not happy about that song naming that town. Okay, so we're gonna stop here, and I'm probably gonna make a part 2. We're gonna talk about some underground music, then about explosion of music industry in 1987. What happened, what changed that suddenly we got rock bands, heavy metal bands, disco bands. There'll be part 2, and I will answer to any of your questions. So if you have any questions, please post in the comments below, and we'll talk to you soon. До свидания, goodbye.